The hug happened at midnight, in front of everyone. And it lasted long enough for the room to notice and quiet enough for me to hear my own heartbeat turn traitor. Fireworks cracked outside the apartment windows, glass rattling, laughter rising and falling like waves, but none of that reached me. All I knew was the weight of her arms tightening instead of loosening, the way her breath caught against my collarbone, the way she didn't pull away when she should have. When she finally did step back, her hands lingered on my sides as if she'd forgotten where she was, and I understood, with a clarity that felt almost cruel, that something had already changed and there was no clean way to put it back. I tried to laugh it off, to say something harmless, but the sound came out wrong. She smiled too quickly, the kind of smile that's meant to reassure an audience rather than tell the truth, and turned to accept congratulations from someone else. Around us, the party surged back to life. Music swelled, someone popped another bottle, the city outside kept celebrating the arrival of a new year like nothing had cracked open between us. I stood there, my arms still half raised, my body remembering her warmth even as she moved away. Her name was Rowan, and we'd known each other for almost 2 years, long enough for people to assume we were unremarkable, long enough for them to think whatever we were was settled. She was my roommate's best friend, the one who showed up unannounced with groceries and opinions, the one who borrowed my sweaters without asking and always remembered how I took my coffee. I had learned her rhythms, the way she tapped her thumb when she was nervous, the way she went quiet when she was hurt. I had also learned the careful rules of our proximity. Sit close but not too close, laugh but don't linger, never touch for longer than a beat unless it could be explained away. Midnight broke those rules. After the hug, I escaped to the kitchen under the pretense of refilling drinks. My hands shook as I opened the fridge. I told myself it was just the crowd, just the noise, just the overstimulation of another year ending. I told myself that if I didn't look at her, didn't think about the way her arms had tightened, the moment would shrink back into something manageable. But the kitchen window reflected the living room, and in that reflection, I saw her scanning the room, her eyes stopping where I stood before flicking away again. "Hey," she said a moment later, appearing beside me like she'd been summoned by my thoughts. Her voice was softer than usual, almost careful. "You okay?" I nodded too fast. "Yeah, just crowded?" She leaned against the counter, close enough that I could smell the citrus of her perfume, something she'd started wearing recently. "You disappeared." "I didn't want to spill anything," I said, holding up an empty glass like proof of responsibility. It was a weak joke, and she smiled politely instead of laughing. There was a pause that stretched, fragile and unfamiliar. Her thumb tapped against the counter. My pulse answered. "That was a long hug," she said finally, not looking at me. The words landed between us like a dropped plate, the sound echoing. "It was New Year's," I said. "People hug." "Yeah," she said. "They do." Silence pressed in. The refrigerator hummed. Someone in the other room shouted a countdown for a game that had nothing to do with time. I wanted to say something honest and couldn't find the shape of it. I wanted to apologize for something I hadn't done on purpose. I wanted to ask her why she'd held on. Rowan straightened. "I should check on Maya," she said, naming my roommate like a shield. "She's been drinking champagne like it's water." "Right," I said. "Good idea." She hesitated, then reached out and squeezed my arm, a quick grounding touch that sent another wave of heat through me. "Happy New Year," she said, meeting my eyes this time. "Happy New Year," I echoed. She left before I could say anything else, and the kitchen felt colder for it. I poured myself water and drank it like a remedy, like something that could flush the moment from my system. It didn't work. The rest of the night passed in fragments. Conversations I half heard, music I didn't remember choosing, Rowan moving through the apartment, always just within my line of sight, never quite close enough to force another reckoning. When the party finally thinned and people bundled themselves into coats and ride shares, I volunteered to clean up, grateful for a task that required my hands. Rowan helped without being asked. We worked side by side, stacking cups, wiping counters, moving in a practice dance that felt more intimate than the hug had been. Once our fingers brushed as we reached for the same plate, and neither of us apologized. "Do you want to walk?" she asked, when the apartment was quiet again, Maya already asleep in her. "Room, now?" I asked. "Yeah," she said, "if you're not tired." I was exhausted in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. "Sure." Outside, the city was washed in the afterglow of celebration. Confetti clung to sidewalks. The air was sharp and clean, the kind of cold that wakes you up. We walked without a destination, hands shoved into pockets, shoulders almost touching. "I didn't mean to make things weird," Rowan said after a block. "You didn't," I said, even though my chest felt tight. "It's fine." She stopped walking. I took another step before realizing, then turned back. Under the streetlight, her face looked more serious than I'd ever seen it. "Is it?" she asked. I searched for the safest answer and found none. "I don't know," I said, which felt like the first true thing I'd said all night. She exhaled, a small cloud in the cold. "Me neither." We stood there suspended. A car passed, tires hissing over wet pavement. Somewhere someone laughed. Life continued to be inconsiderate of our pause. I keep thinking about it, she said, quieter now. The hug. My throat tightened. Me too. She nodded like that confirmed something she'd already suspected. I don't usually... She stopped, frowned slightly. I don't usually lose track of time like that. I don't usually let people, I said, then winced at how revealing it sounded. Her gaze sharpened. Let them what? I could have retreated, I could have made a joke, blamed the champagne, the sentimentality of a new year. Instead, I felt the weight of the last 2 years pressing in, almost every careful distance. Hold me, I said. The word hung between us, exposed. Rowan didn't look away. Oh, she said, like she'd just stepped into a room she'd been avoiding. Okay. We didn't touch, not yet. The choice felt deliberate, heavy with consequence. We should probably talk about this, she said. Probably, I agreed. Not here, she added, glancing down the empty street. My place, I offered, immediately aware of how that sounded, then rushed to clarify. Just to talk. She smiled, a little sad, a little relieved. Yeah, to talk. We walked the rest of the way in silence that felt different from before, charged but not empty. Inside my apartment, I turned on a lamp, the soft light making everything feel smaller, more contained. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, a gulf of cushions between us. Rowan clasped her hands together. I don't want to mess things up, she said. You're important to me. You're important to me too, I said. It was easy to say that part. And Maya, she continued. And the whole everything. I know, I said, the external pressures lined up neatly, like reasons stacked for easy reference. She looked at me then, really looked. But I also don't want to pretend nothing happened. My heart kicked. Neither do I. Another pause, deeper this time. I felt like we were standing on opposite sides of a line drawn years ago, neither of us willing to cross. Without permission. There's something I should tell you, Rowan said. I braced myself. Okay, she swallowed. I've been seeing someone. The words landed harder than I expected, a dull ache blooming behind my ribs. I managed to keep my face neutral. Oh, it's not serious, she added quickly, then seemed to reconsider. I mean, it is, kind of, but it's new. I nodded, the motion stiff. I didn't know. I didn't tell you, she said. I wasn't sure how. A dozen questions crowded my mouth. Instead, I asked the one that mattered most. Why are you telling me now? She held my gaze, vulnerability plain. Because when I hugged you tonight, I realized I'd been lying to myself. My breath caught. The room felt too small. About what? About why I keep coming back here, she said softly. About why I compare everyone to you. The silence that followed was electric, terrifying. I leaned back against the couch, grounding myself in the familiar fabric. Rowan, I said carefully, what are you saying? She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. I'm saying I think I've wanted you for a long time, she said, and I don't know what to do about it. The confession sat between us, raw and undeniable. I felt the urge to reach across the cushions, to close the distance and end the uncertainty, and the equally strong urge to protect everything that could be lost. I don't know either, I said, truth heavy on my tongue. She laughed softly, a sound edged with nerves. Happy New Year, she murmured, like a benediction and a warning all at once. I watched her stand, watched her pull on her coat with hands that trembled just a little. At the door, she turned back. Can we not decide anything tonight, she asked, relief and disappointment tangled. Yeah, I said. We can wait. She nodded, then did something that felt more intimate than the hug. She touched my cheek, just once, her fingers warm against my skin. Good night, she said. Good night. The door closed behind her, the click loud in the quiet apartment. I stood there long after, my cheeks still tingling, the New Year stretching ahead like a question I wasn't ready to answer. The days after New Year's felt suspended, like the city itself was holding its breath. Rowan didn't text me the next morning, or the one after that, and I told myself it was sensible. Space was responsible. I was sitting across from her in a quiet cafe, my hands wrapped around a cup I'd barely touched. Rowan looked tired, shadows under her eyes, her hair pulled back in a way that exposed the line of her throat. She smiled when she saw me, tentative and familiar. Hey, she said, hey. We sat in silence for a moment, the hum of conversation around us filling the gap. Rowan was the one who broke it because she always was. I didn't handle that well, she said, leaving like that. I shrugged. It was a lot. Yeah, she agreed. She traced the rim of her cup with her finger, the same nervous habit. I've been trying to figure out what I'm allowed to feel. Allowed by who, I asked before I could stop myself. She winced. Fair. I took a breath. You said you were seeing someone. I am, she said. Her name's Lila. The name landed softly, still heavy. Do you like her? Rowan hesitated. I do. Then why are we here? The question came out quieter than I intended. Because liking someone isn't the same as... She stopped, frowned. I don't know how to say this without sounding terrible. Try, I said, because being with her doesn't make everything else go quiet, she said. And being with you does. My chest tightened. That's not fair to her, I said, even as a dangerous warmth spread through me. I know, Rowan said. That's why I haven't told her any of this. And before you ask, no, I haven't seen her since New Year's. That surprised me. You said you stayed at a friend's. I did, she said. Not hers. Something shifted, subtle but significant. What do you want from me, I asked. She met my eyes, earnest and afraid. I want honesty, she said. I want to stop pretending this is nothing. And then what? I pressed. Her mouth curved into a sad smile. I don't know, she admitted. But I know I don't want to lose you. The words were a thread pulled tight between us. I could feel myself leaning toward them, toward her. Rowan, I said, choosing each word carefully. I can't be the thing you figure out while someone else gets hurt. She nodded, relief and pain mingling. I wouldn't ask you to be. So, I said, forcing myself to stay steady. Figure it out, on your own. Her eyes searched my face. And after? After, I said, we'll see. She exhaled long and shaky. Okay. We finished our coffee in a quiet that felt less fraught than before but no less intense. When we stood to leave, Rowan hesitated, then pulled me into a brief hug. It was careful, restrained, nothing like New Year's. Still, it lingered just a second too long. Thank you, she said. For what? For not closing the door, she said, then stepped back before I could respond. The following weeks were an exercise in restraint. Rowan pulled back in visible ways, declining invitations, limiting her time at the apartment. I told myself it was good. That distance would dull the edge of wanting. Instead, it sharpened it. Every shared glance when she did come by felt charged. Every accidental touch sent a jolt through me. Lila became a presence without being present. A shadow cast by Rowan's carefulness. I hated myself for wondering about her, for imagining her laugh, her hands, the way Rowan might look at her. I hated myself more for the relief I felt when Rowan mentioned, offhand, that things were complicated. It was Maya who forced the issue, as she always did. You're both miserable, she said one night, sprawled on the couch between us like a referee. And it's boring to watch. Rowan laughed weakly. Sorry, Maya rolled her eyes. I'm serious, you keep orbiting each other like this is some kind of test. Rowan glanced at me, then away. It's not that simple. Nothing is, Maya said, but you're adults. Figure out what you're willing to risk. The word hung there, risk. That night, after Rowan left, I lay awake replaying Maya's words. What was I willing to risk? Friendship, stability, the easy certainty of knowing where I stood, or the slow erosion of wanting something I refused to name? The answer came sooner than I expected. 2 weeks later, Rowan showed up at my door, unannounced. Her eyes were red, her breath unsteady. Can I come in? She asked. I stepped aside without thinking. She paced the living room, like it was too small to contain her. I told her, she said. My heart lurched. You told Lila? She nodded. That I have feelings for someone else. I swallowed. What did she say? That she deserves better than half-truths, Rowan said, voice breaking. That she's not going to compete with a ghost. Guilt and relief tangled in my chest. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it in more ways than one. She asked who, Rowan continued. I didn't tell her. I waited, pulse loud in my ears. She broke up with me anyway, Rowan said. Said she could tell it was. You. The room felt like it tilted. She knows about me? Rowan nodded, shame flickering across her face. I talk about you, she said, more than I realized. I sank onto the couch, suddenly unsteady. Rowan, I know, she said quickly. This is a mess. I'm not here to ask you to fix it. She stopped, pressed her hands together. I needed to see you. I looked up at her at the vulnerability laid bare. What are you asking for? I asked, the question echoing our earlier conversation. She met my gaze, eyes shining. I'm asking if there's a chance, she said, if everything we've been circling is actually something. The room went very quiet. I stood, closing the distance between us without touching. And if there is? I asked. Then I want to do this right, Rowan said, slowly, honestly. And if there isn't? I pressed, her voice dropped. Then I'll walk away, she said, for real this time. The weight of that settled, over me, heavy and terrifying. I thought of the nights without her, the dull ache of restraint. I thought of the risk Maya had named. I reached out, stopping just short of touching her. I'm scared, I admitted. Me too, Rowan said. The admission felt like a bridge. I let my hand settle on her arm, the contact sending a quiet shock through me. She didn't move away. I can't promise anything, I said, except that I won't pretend. Rowan nodded, something like hope blooming in her expression. She leaned in slowly, giving me time to pull back. I didn't. Our foreheads touched, breath mingling, the intimacy quiet and overwhelming. It wasn't a kiss, but it felt just as consequential. I should go, she murmured, even as she stayed. Yeah, I agreed, my voice barely above a whisper. We stood there for a long moment, suspended between what had been and what could be. Finally, Rowan stepped back, a small smile breaking through. Tomorrow, she asked. Tomorrow, I said. She left, the door closing softly behind her. I stood there, heart racing, aware that something irreversible had shifted. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to the way my world had narrowed to a single question: what happens when wanting finally becomes a choice? Tomorrow arrived too quickly and not quickly enough at the same time. I barely slept, caught between anticipation and dread, my thoughts looping through every possible outcome like they were auditioning for permanence. By morning, the city looked deceptively ordinary. Cars moved, coffee shops opened, people lived their lives as if nothing fragile was about to be tested. Rowan texted just after 10. "Can we walk by the river?" I stared at the message, then typed back yes before my fear could negotiate better terms. The river path was cold and bright, winter light reflecting off the water in sharp flashes. Rowan was already there when I arrived, leaning against the railing, her coat unzipped despite the cold. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hey," she said, "hey." We started walking without touching, our steps falling into an uneasy rhythm. For a while neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't empty, but it was loaded, like a held breath that could tip into anything. "I didn't sleep," Rowan said finally. "Me neither." She huffed a soft laugh. "Figures." We walked another block before she slowed, stopping near a bend where the river widened. "I keep thinking about what you said," she said. "About not pretending." I leaned against the railing beside her. "I meant it." "I know," she said. "That's what scares me." I turned to face her. "Why?" "Because pretending is easier," she said. "And because if we stop pretending, then whatever happens is real." The words settled heavily between us. Real meant consequences. Real meant there was no plausible deniability left. "I don't want to rush this," I said, "but I also don't want to keep circling forever." Rowan nodded slowly. "Neither do I." She looked out at the water, her jaw tight. "I've spent the last 2 weeks trying to convince myself that what I feel is just timing, or proximity, or habit," she said. "Like if I could explain it away, it would stop mattering." "And?" I asked. "And it didn't work," she said. "It just made me feel dishonest." Something in her voice softened, cracked just enough to let truth through. I reached for her hand without thinking. This time she took it immediately, her fingers threading through mine like they'd been waiting for permission. The contact was grounding and terrifying all at once. "Okay," I said quietly. "Then let's be honest." She squeezed my hand. "Okay." We stood there like that for a moment, the city moving around us, the river steady and indifferent. It felt like stepping into a current. "I need to tell you something," I said. Her gaze sharp and attentive. "Yeah? I've been holding back for a long time," I said. "Not just with you, with Ev. Arione, it's easier to stay contained than to risk wanting more than you can have." Rowan's thumb brushed over my knuckles, a small, intimate gesture. "And with me?" "With you," I said. "It stopped being contained a while ago, I just didn't let myself say it." She swallowed. "Why?" "Because you mattered," I said simply. "And because I didn't want to be the reason things got complicated." She let out a breath that sounded like relief. "I wish you'd told me." "I know," I said, "but we don't get to rewrite it." "No," she agreed. "We just get to decide what we do now." The words echoed Maya's advice, reframed. Decide what you're willing to risk. Rowan turned toward me fully. "I'm not asking you to jump into anything," she said. "I just want to know if we're moving toward something or away from it." I met her gaze, steadying myself. "Toward," I said, carefully, "but yes." Her smile this time was real, tentative but unmistakable. She stepped closer, closing the last inches between us. We stood there, faces close, breath visible in the cold. "This would be the part where people expect us to kiss," she said softly. I felt a flicker of nervous laughter. "Yeah." She searched my face. "Do you want to?" The question mattered more than the answer. "I do," I said, "but I don't want it to be the thing that decides everything." Rowan nodded, understanding immediate and deep. "Then let's not rush it." We stayed there, foreheads touching briefly, a quiet acknowledgement instead of a declaration. When we pulled back, it felt intentional rather than restrained. The next few weeks unfolded in a strange, in-between space. We didn't call it dating, but we didn't pretend it was nothing. We spent time together deliberately, choosing neutral spaces at first. Long walks, bookstores, late lunches where conversation stretched and deepened. The chemistry was undeniable, but so was the care. Maya noticed the shift immediately. "So," she said one evening watching us from the kitchen as Rowan and I sat a little too close on the couch. "Are we acknowledging whatever this is now?" Rowan glanced at me, a silent check-in. I nodded. "We're figuring it out," Maya grinned. "About time." Not everyone reacted with the same ease. A week later I ran into Lila by accident. I recognized her immediately from the way Rowan had described her. Dark hair, thoughtful eyes, a presence that felt composed even in surprise. She recognized me too. "You're her," she said, not unkindly. "I am," I said, bracing myself. She studied me for a moment, then sighed. "I thought so." I'm sorry, I said, the words inadequate but necessary. She nodded. I know, she said, just be honest with her, that's all I wanted. The encounter left me shaken, the reality of collateral damage impossible to ignore. When I told Rowan about it that night, she went quiet, guilt washing over her features. I never wanted to hurt her, she said. I know, I said, but wanting doesn't always stop it. She nodded, tears threatening. This is what I'm afraid of, she said. That choosing this means accepting that someone else got hurt. I took her hand. It means accepting that choices matter, I said, not that they're wrong. She leaned into me then, her head against my shoulder, and I wrapped my arm around her instinctively. It was the first time we'd held each other like that, and it felt both natural and weighty. I don't want to lose myself in this, she murmured. Then don't, I said. We can go slow. She pulled back, looking at me with something like gratitude. You're good at this? At what? At not turning intensity into chaos, she said. I smiled faintly. I've had practice. As winter edged toward spring, the tension between us shifted. What had once been unspoken became a quiet understanding. We touched more, hands on arms, fingers brushing, the occasional embrace that lingered just long enough to feel intentional. Still, we avoided naming it, like speaking the word might collapse the careful balance. Until it didn't, the moment came on an ordinary Tuesday. Unremarkable in every way except the one that mattered. We were in my kitchen, cooking dinner together, music playing softly. Rowan reached past me for a spice, her body close, her breath warm against my neck. I turned, caught off guard by the proximity, and our faces ended up inches apart. The air shifted, thick and undeniable. Rowan, I said, her name a question. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze dropped to my mouth and lifted again. If we don't do something, she said quietly, this is going to keep happening. I swallowed. What do you want to do? She hesitated, then said the thing neither of us had said yet. I want to be with you. The words hit hard, their simplicity leaving no room to hide. I want that too, I said. Her eyes softened, relief and fear mingling. Then we should say it, she said, out loud to ourselves. I nodded, my heart pounding. Okay. She took a breath. We're choosing this, she said, even if it's complicated. We're choosing this, I echoed. The kiss that followed was inevitable, but it was also careful, slow. Our lips met gently, like a promise rather than a demand. When we pulled back, the world felt subtly altered, like a door had closed behind us. We didn't go any further. We stood there holding each other, letting the reality settle. Later that night, alone in my room, I lay awake replaying the moment, the warmth of her, the certainty in her voice. For the first time, wanting didn't feel like a question mark, but certainty has a way of inviting new doubts. The next morning, Rowan didn't text. By afternoon, my chest was tight again, old fears resurfacing. When she finally called that evening, her voice was strained. I need to talk to you, she said. My heart sank. Okay. There's something I didn't tell you, she said, and it's going to complicate things. I closed my eyes, bracing myself as the weight of our choice shifted once again into something unsteady. She came over instead of explaining on the phone, which somehow made it worse. I spent the half hour before she arrived pacing my living room, every possible revelation lining up in my head like suspects. When the knock finally came, I opened the door too quickly, as if speed could blunt whatever she was about to say. Rowan stood there with her hands shoved into her coat pockets, shoulders drawn inward. She didn't kiss me hello. That omission alone told me this wasn't small. Hey, she said. Hey, I replied, stepping aside, to let her in. She didn't sit right away. She stood near the window, staring out at the street like she needed distance even inside the room. I stayed where I was, suddenly unsure of the rules again. You said there was something you did. Tell me, I said gently. She nodded. I found out last week, she said. I was waiting for the right moment. Then everything with us happened, and it felt like if I said it, it would poison the choice. My stomach tightened. Rowan. She turned, then finally looking at me. I might be moving. The words landed quietly, but the impact was immediate. Moving, I repeated. My firm offered me a position in Seattle, she said. It's a promotion. Big one. I tried to process it to line it up with everything else. When? They want an answer by the end of the month, she said. And if I take it, I'd leave in 6 weeks. 6 weeks, the number echoed, absurdly specific. You were going to decide all of this without telling me? I asked, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. I was trying to, she admitted, because I didn't want you to feel like you were part of the calculation. And now? I asked. And now you are, she said softly, whether we like it or not. I sank onto the couch, the familiar cushion suddenly foreign. Is that why you pulled away today? She nodded. I woke up and realized how real last night was, she said, and then I remembered this, and I panicked. The words sat heavy between us. About me, I said. About everything, she corrected. About choosing something and losing something else. I looked up at her. Do you want to go? She hesitated, and the pause told me more than the answer ever could. I've worked toward this for years, she said, but I didn't expect it to collide with... This. With us, I said. Yes, she said, meeting my gaze. Silence settled, thick but not hostile. I felt the urge to make it easier for her, to tell her she should go, that I'd understand. I also felt the quiet, stubborn truth that I didn't want to preemptively grieve something we hadn't even fully claimed yet. What are you afraid of? I asked. She let out a shaky breath. That if I stay, I'll resent you, she said, and that if I go, I'll always wonder who I was becoming with you. The honesty of it hurt more than anything else she could have said. I stood and crossed the room, stopping a careful distance away. I don't want to be a reason you give something up, I said. But I also don't want to pretend this doesn't matter. Rowan's eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall. I don't want a love that only works if one of us shrinks, she said. Neither do I agreed. We stood there, both of us finally acknowledging the full shape of the risk. Not just feelings, not just timing, but futures pulling in different directions. I think we owe it to ourselves to be honest about what this is, I said slowly, before we decide anything else. She nodded. Okay. I'm not asking you to stay, I continued. And I'm not offering to follow you, not yet. I'm asking if what we started is real enough to deserve the truth. Rowan's lips trembled into a small, sad smile. You don't make this easy, I returned the smile. You didn't fall for easy. She laughed quietly, then closed the distance between us. This time, when she took my hands, there was no hesitation. It's real, she said. Whatever happens next. I squeezed her fingers. Then we don't decide tonight, I said. We give it time. We don't run from the fear or let it decide for us. She searched my face. And if time makes it clearer? Then we trust that, I said. Rowan leaned in, resting her forehead against mine, the familiar intimacy grounding us. Thank you, she whispered. For not trying to own the outcome. For not pretending, I replied. The weeks that followed were both tender and brutal. We moved forward with intention, knowing the clock was there but refusing to let it dominate every moment. We told Maya the truth, all of it. She listened, then hugged us both, fierce and unapologetic. I don't care where this lands, she said, just don't lie to each other. We didn't. Rowan and I fell into something that felt less like a whirlwind and more like a deepening current. Quiet dinners, shared mornings, conversations that stretched late into the night, where we talked about fears that predated each other, and hopes that suddenly felt shared. We learned the edges of one another, the places that needed patience. There were hard days, too. Moments when the impending decision loomed and we snapped or withdrew. Each time we found our way back, not because it was easy, but because it mattered. 2 days before Rowan's deadline, we sat on my fire escape, city lights flickering below us. The air was warm, spring finally asserting itself. I've been thinking, Rowan said. So have I replied. She smiled faintly. I'm going to ask for a deferral. I turned to her, surprised. You can do that? I can, she said. 6 months. They won't love it, but they'll consider it. And what does that mean? I asked carefully. It means I don't want to decide the rest of my life under pressure, she said. And I don't want to walk away from us just because I'm afraid of wanting two things. My chest loosened, not with certainty, but with relief. That feels right. I said. She nodded. I'm not choosing against my career, she added quickly. I'm choosing not to abandon something that's still becoming. I reached for her hand, our fingers fitting easily now. Whatever happens in 6 months, I said, I'm glad we didn't let fear write the ending. She leaned into me, her head on my shoulder. Me too. When midnight came again months later, quieter this time, we stood on that same fire escape. No crowd, no countdown, just the city breathing around us. Rowan wrapped her arms around me, and the hug lasted exactly as long as it needed to.